I haven't been able to find a single person who drove Harlan County Route 9 after midnight and came home to the same house they left. That's not a metaphor. I mean, the houses look the same. The addresses are correct. The mailboxes have the right names. But the people inside them don't recognize you the way they should. Or they recognize you in a way that's slightly too much, slightly too eager, as if they've been rehearsing for your arrival and haven't quite gotten the performance natural yet. My name is Corinne Elsby, and I was the night dispatcher for the Harlan County Volunteer Ambulance Service for 11 years. I'm not telling this story because I want attention. I'm telling it because I owe a debt to 17 people I failed to warn in time, and because there are still people driving that road, and some of them are going to drive it tonight. And I need them to understand what they're entering when the odometer starts disagreeing with the mile markers. The ambulance service operated out of a converted gas station on the county line between Harlan and Letcher. 2 bays, a break room with a microwave that smelled like burned popcorn, and a dispatch desk that was really just a folding table with a radio and a landline phone with a cord so tangled it looked like a nervous system. I worked the overnight shift, 11 to 7, because I had insomnia anyway, because the pay differential was an extra $1.60 an hour, and because I was the only dispatcher willing to do it 5 nights a week after Danny Pruitt quit in March of 2019. Danny didn't give a reason for quitting. He just stopped showing up. When the station chief, Roy Mackey, called to ask him what happened, Danny said he didn't want to answer the radio anymore after midnight, and that Roy should respect that. Roy told me this like it was a joke about Danny being dramatic, but I remembered the way Danny's voice had sounded on his last few overnight shifts. Not scared exactly. Tired in a way that didn't match someone who was sitting in a chair. Tired the way people sound after carrying something for a long distance. I didn't think about Danny much after that. I was good at the job. I knew every road in the county by feel, knew which ones flooded in spring, which ones iced first in November, which ones had the blind curves where the teenagers wiped out every prom season. I could hear an address over a crackling radio and picture the driveway, the house, the fastest route for the crew to take. I was the kind of dispatcher who got thank you cards from families because the ambulance arrived 4 minutes faster than it should have. I was proud of that. Route 9 was one of the roads I knew best. It ran 17 miles from the junction at Collie Creek to the Letcher County line, following the river valley through terrain that was half reclaimed mine land and half old-growth hillside that had never been cut because the slopes were too steep to be worth the effort. During the day, it was a pleasant drive. 2 lanes, decent pavement by eastern Kentucky standards, wildflowers on the shoulders in June. There was a volunteer fire station at mile 4, a church at mile 7, a cluster of houses around mile 11 where the Combs family had lived for 5 generations, and then a long empty stretch through the narrows before the county line. I dispatched calls en route 9 dozens of times. Fender benders, chest pains, a kid who fell off an ATV, an elderly woman whose oxygen concentrator lost power during a storm. Routine calls, all of them, and the road behaved itself. The mile markers counted up in order. The intersections stayed where they were. The distances matched. The first time I noticed something wrong, I didn't even register it as wrong. It was a Tuesday in October of 2019, around 1:30 in the morning. A call came in from a woman named Shelley Prater, who lived at mile marker 14. Her husband was having trouble breathing. She thought maybe a heart attack. I dispatched Unit 2, Mike Estes and Lena Darby, and gave them the fastest route, which was straight out Route 9 from the station at mile 4. They should have reached Shelley's house in about 12 minutes. Good road, no traffic, dry conditions. I tracked them by radio. Mike called in when they passed mile 7, then mile 10. Then, 17 minutes after departure, he called in again and said they were at mile 8. I assumed he'd misspoken. I keyed the radio and asked him to confirm. Confirming mile 8, Mike said. I'm reading the marker right now. Lena's voice came on, overlapping his. The GPS is doing something weird, Corinne. It's showing us past the Combs place, but the marker says 8. I told them to disregard the marker and keep driving. Probably a maintenance error. The highway department sometimes replaced markers after they got knocked down by vehicles and put them back in the wrong spots. It happened, Mike acknowledged, and they kept going. 4 minutes later, they arrived at Shelley's house, and the call proceeded normally. Her husband was having a panic attack, not a cardiac event. They transported him to the hospital in Whitesburg as a precaution. In the paperwork the next morning, Mike noted the anomalous mile marker in the run report's comments field. Marker 8 appeared to be between markers 12 and 14. Recommend highway depth check. It was the kind of note nobody reads. I read it only because I read everything. I checked the highway department's maintenance log the following week when I was at the county clerk's office for an unrelated reason. Route 9's markers had last been serviced in July, and all 17 were logged as correctly placed. I let it go. I had no reason not to. The second incident was 3 weeks later. Different crew, different call, same road, same time window. Unit 1, responding to a single vehicle accident reported by a passing trucker at mile 13. The crew, Janet Hobbs and a new EMT named Tyler Rowe, drove Route 9 from the station. Janet radioed in at regular intervals. Mile 4, mile 7, mile 10. Then she said, "Corinne, we just passed mile 6. I asked her to repeat. Mile 6. We haven't turned around. We haven't taken any intersections. We've been driving straight for 20 minutes on a road I've driven 1,000 times, and we just passed mile 6, and the road is not the road." Tyler came on. He sounded young and confused, which he was. "She's right. The curves are different. There's a hollow on the left side that isn't on the map. I don't recognize any of this." I told them to stop, turn around, and return to the station. Janet said she was going to keep going because there was an accident victim waiting. I told her again to stop. She didn't respond for 90 seconds. When she came back on, her voice was different, calmer, almost gentle. "We found them, Corinne. We're on scene. Mile 13. Everything's fine." They treated the driver, a man with a broken collarbone and lacerations, and transported him. The run report listed no anomalies. I pulled Janet aside the next morning when she came in to restock the unit and asked her about the mile markers. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "I don't remember saying that on the radio." I told her I had the recording. She said she believed me, but that she didn't remember it. She remembered the drive being smooth and uneventful. She remembered arriving on scene in the expected time frame. She did not remember stopping, or the hollow on the left, or Tyler being confused. I found Tyler in the parking lot. He was sitting in his car, eating a gas station breakfast sandwich. I asked him about the drive. "Which part?" he said. "The part where the mile markers were out of order." He chewed slowly. "I remember that. Janet told me not to worry about it. She told me she doesn't remember it." Tyler stopped chewing. He looked at his sandwich like it had said something unpleasant to him. "That's not great," he said. We agreed it was not great. We did not do anything about it. Tyler transferred to a station in Perry County 2 months later. His transfer request cited personal reasons. I started keeping a separate notebook. Not the dispatch log, which was an official county record, but a cheap composition book from the Dollar General, the kind with the black and white marbled cover. I wrote the date, the time, the crew, and what happened on Route 9 after midnight. I kept it in my car's glove compartment because I didn't want it in the station where Roy might find it and ask questions I didn't have answers to. Over the next 4 months, I logged 11 more incidents. Not all of them were as dramatic as Janet and Tyler's drive. Some were small. A crew reporting that the drive felt longer than expected. A paramedic noting that the church at mile 7 was dark on a night when it should have had its parking lot lights on for a Wednesday prayer meeting. A driver mentioning that the river, which ran along the left side of the road for the first 9 miles, had appeared on the right side for a stretch. Some were larger. Unit 3, responding to a difficulty breathing call at mile 15, radioed that they had reached the Letcher County line, which should be mile 17, at what their odometer said was mile 11. They drove another 6 miles past the county line sign and found the patient's house. On the return trip, the county line was in the correct place, and the drive was the expected distance. Both crew members remembered the discrepancy, but described feeling not bothered by it at the time. Twice, crews reported seeing structures on Route 9 that I could not match to any address in the county database. A long, low building with no windows set back from the road near mile 9, lit from inside with a yellow light that flickered in a rhythm one paramedic described as like breathing. A 2-story house at mile 12 with laundry on the line, which would have been unremarkable, except there was no house. At mile 12, the Combs cluster was at 11, and the next residence was at 14, and there was nothing but hillside and river between them. Nobody on any of these calls was hurt by the discrepancies. The crews always arrived, the patients were always treated and transported, the paperwork was always filed. In every measurable way, the ambulance service continued to function. That's what made it difficult to raise as a problem. What was I going to tell Roy? The road is acting strange, but everyone's fine. The mile markers rearrange themselves, but the calls get answered. He'd tell me to get more sleep. He'd be right to say that, based on the evidence available to him. So I kept the notebook, and I watched the pattern, and I waited for it to clarify itself into something I could explain. In February of 2020, it clarified. A call came in at 12:40 on a Thursday morning. Chest pains, mile marker 2, a man named Gerald Watts. Easy call, close to the station, no distance to cover. I dispatched Unit 2, Mike Estes again, this time with a new partner named Bree Colson. They left the station at 12:43. Mile 2 was 3 minutes from the station. At 12:53, 10 minutes after departure, Mike hadn't radioed in. I called him. No response. I called again at 12:56. Nothing. At 1:02, I tried Bree's personal cell phone, which was against protocol but not unprecedented. It went straight to voicemail. I called Roy at home. He drove to the station in 12 minutes, got in the backup vehicle, and drove Route 9 himself. He found Gerald Watts at mile 2, sitting on his porch, annoyed. No ambulance had arrived. Roy transported him to the hospital personally. Unit 2 was found the next morning, parked neatly on the shoulder of Route 9 at mile 15, engine off, keys in the ignition, both doors closed. The medical equipment in the back was secured properly. The cab was clean. Mike and Bree were not inside. Mike Estes was found 4 hours later, walking along the shoulder of Route 9 near mile 3, heading toward the station. He was in his uniform. He was calm. He said he didn't know where Bree was. He said the call had gone normally. He said they'd treated the patient, transported him, and then he'd decided to walk back to the station for the exercise. When Roy pointed out that the patient had never been picked up, that the ambulance was at mile 15, and that Bree was missing, Mike became confused, and then quiet, and then he asked to go home. Bree Colson was found by a hiker the following afternoon, sitting on a rock beside the river at mile 11, approximately 400 feet from the road down a steep embankment. She was in her uniform. She was hypothermic, but conscious. She told the search team that she had gotten out of the ambulance to check on something she'd seen by the river and had become disoriented. When asked what she'd seen by the river, she said she didn't want to answer that question. I visited Bree in the hospital. She'd been admitted for observation because her core body temperature had been 92 degrees, which was dangerous but not critical. She was sitting up in bed, eating Jell-O, looking like a person who'd had a bad night but was otherwise fine. I sat in the chair beside her bed and I opened my notebook and I told her everything. The mile markers, the missing time, the discrepancies, Janet's amnesia, the structures that shouldn't exist. I told her I'd been documenting it for 5 months and I wanted to know what she'd seen. Bree set down the Jell-O cup. She asked me to close the door. I did. "The road moved us," she said. "I know how that sounds. I don't mean we got lost. I mean the road moved. We were driving toward mile 2, and the road took us somewhere else." Mike didn't notice. He was driving and talking about his daughter's basketball game, and he didn't notice that the trees were different, and the river was on the wrong side, and the sky was lower, Corinne. It was lower, and it was the wrong color. Not like a different time of day, like a different quality of darkness. I asked her what happened then. We drove for a long time. The mile markers were counting up, but they didn't have numbers on them anymore. They were just blank posts, white posts, on the side of the road with nothing printed on them. And then we came to a place where the road widened, and there were other vehicles parked on both sides. 6 or 7 of them. Some of them were old. One was a truck that had to be from the 60s or 70s. And there were people standing by the vehicles, just standing there, facing the road, and Mike slowed down because he thought it was a traffic stop or an accident scene. She paused and picked at the edge of her blanket. They weren't right, the people. They were standing the way people stand, but their proportions were wrong. Too long in the torso, too still. They were all facing the same direction, looking down the road at something ahead of us that I couldn't see because of the curve. Mike stopped the ambulance and said he was going to check if anyone needed help, and I said, "Mike, don't get out." And he said, "Why not?" And I didn't have an answer, because I couldn't explain why the people were wrong. They just were. He got out. He walked toward the nearest one, and I saw his posture change. His shoulders dropped, and his head tilted, and he turned to look at me through the windshield, and his face was... It was Mike's face, but it was doing something Mike's face doesn't do. He was smiling in a way that used all of his muscles at once. Not a normal smile, like every part of his face was being pulled upward simultaneously. I asked her what she did. I got out the passenger side and I ran. I went off the road and down the hillside and I hit the river and I followed it. I don't know for how long. I could hear the road above me for a while, and then I couldn't. And then it was daylight, and I was sitting on a rock, and a man in hiking boots was asking me if I was okay. I asked her about Mike, whether she thought the Mike who'd walked back to the station was the same Mike who'd gotten out of the ambulance. Bree looked at me with an expression I have thought about almost every day since. "He picked up his daughter from school on Friday," she said. "I saw the photos on his Facebook. She was smiling. She looked happy to see him." That doesn't answer my question. I know it doesn't. I know it doesn't. Bree quit the service a week later. She moved to Lexington. We spoke on the phone twice in the following months, and then she stopped returning my calls. I don't think anything happened to her. I think she decided to be done with it, and I respect that. I wish I'd had the same capacity. Mike Estes continued working on the ambulance service. He responded to calls. He filled out paperwork. He attended the annual training refresher. He was, by every metric available to me, exactly the same person he'd been before. His run reports were identical in style to his prior ones. He used the same abbreviations. He made the same dry comments in the margins. He brought the same thermos of coffee to every shift. But I watched him. I watched him for months. looking for the seam, looking for the place where whatever was wearing him had gotten the fit slightly wrong. And I found it, and it was so small that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Mike Estes, before February, had a habit of clicking his pen. 3 quick clicks when he was thinking, a nervous tick that everyone in the station knew about because it drove Janet crazy during shift changes. After February, he still clicked his pen. But it was 4 clicks. Every time. 4 instead of 3. I have spent more hours than I will admit to anyone thinking about what that means. Whether Mike is in there and the count is different because something was added to him. Whether Mike is gone and the thing that replaced him learned the clicking habit from observation but miscounted. Whether I am a sleep-deprived woman in a gas station assigning cosmic significance to a pen click because I can't face the possibility that nothing happened and my colleague just had a bad night. I don't know. That's the honest answer. I don't know. What I do know is what happened next, because what happened next is in the notebook, and the notebook doesn't speculate, it just records. After Mike and Bree, the incidents on Route 9 changed character. Not frequency, they'd been happening 2 or 3 times a month, and they continued at roughly that rate. What changed was the nature of the distortion. Before, the road had been rearranging itself. After, it started offering things. The first time was in April. Unit 1, responding to a fall at mile 10, reported passing a fully lit building at mile 6 that both crew members identified as a hospital. Not a medical clinic, not a doctor's office, a hospital with an emergency entrance, a lit sign, and an ambulance bay. There is no hospital on Route 9. The nearest hospital is in Whitesburg, 23 miles away. Both crew members reported feeling a strong urge to pull in. The driver, Janet, said it looked modern and clean and warm, and that for a moment she'd considered diverting the patient there instead of continuing to Whitesburg. She didn't. She kept driving. But she said the urge was unusual in its specificity, not a vague impulse, but a detailed, practical thought about how much time they'd save and how much more comfortable the patient would be. The second time was in May. Unit 3, on a late-night transfer run, reported that the road ahead of them straightened and widened for approximately 2 miles, becoming a 4-lane divided highway with fresh pavement and modern signage. The signage, they said, pointed toward destinations that didn't exist. Collie Regional Medical Center, Harlan County Emergency Services Complex, Route 9 Trauma Center. The driver slowed down but didn't stop. When they cleared the 2-mile stretch, the road returned to its normal width and the signs were gone. The third time was in June, and it was the one that made me start making phone calls. I was alone at the dispatch desk at 2 in the morning. No active calls. The radio was quiet. The scanner was cycling through county frequencies, picking up nothing but occasional state police traffic from the interstate. I was reading a paperback mystery novel that I don't remember the title of because of what happened next. My personal cell phone rang. The caller ID said it was my mother's number. My mother had been dead for 3 years. I answered it because I was sleep-deprived, and because the part of my brain that remembers my mother is dead is not the same part of my brain that reacts to her number on a screen. I answered it the way I always answered her calls, with a "Hey, Mama," that came out of my mouth before my conscious mind could intervene. There was road noise on the line. Not static, road noise. The hum of tires on pavement, the whistle of wind around a vehicle's body, the subtle rhythm of expansion joints passing under wheels at regular intervals. And then my mother's voice. Not a recording, not a simulation. My mother's voice, with her specific cadence, her habit of starting sentences with "well," and ending questions with a rising pitch that made even statements sound like she was checking with you. "Well, Corinne, I've been driving for the longest time and I can't seem to find the turn. Can you help me, honey? I know you know these roads. I didn't say anything. I held the phone against my ear, and I listened to the road noise, and I felt the precise combination of warmth and grief and longing that my mother's voice has always produced in me, even now, even knowing what I know. I'm on Route 9, she said. I passed the church a while back, but the road keeps going, and I can't find where I'm supposed to turn. It's real dark out here, honey. Can you stay on with me? I hung up. I sat at the dispatch desk, and I held my phone in both hands, and I breathed until my breathing was steady, and then I opened my notebook, and I wrote down exactly what had happened, and I wrote the time, 2:07 a.m., and I wrote the duration of the call, which was 41 seconds, and I underlined the sentence. The road is now using personal information to target specific individuals 3 times. Then I picked up the landline and I called Roy Mackey, and I told him he needed to come to the station right now. Roy arrived at 2:45, annoyed and half asleep, wearing a UK Wildcats sweatshirt and pajama pants. I sat him down at the folding table and I opened the notebook and I took him through everything. Every entry, every incident, 5 months of documentation, Mike and Bree, the Phantom Hospital, the 4-lane highway to nowhere, the phone call from my dead mother. Roy listened. He's a good listener, which is one of the reasons he's been the station chief for 20 years. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tell me I was crazy. He let me finish. When I was done, he rubbed his face with both hands and said, "I know. Those are the 2 worst words I've ever heard in my life. Worse than the doctor telling me about my mother's diagnosis. Worse than anything that's come after. Because when Roy Mackey said, 'I know,' the thing I heard was not confirmation. It was duration. He didn't say, 'I believe you,' or 'that matches what I've heard.' He said, 'I know,' present tense, the way you describe a condition you live with." "How long?" I asked. "Long as I've been chief. Longer." Earl Patton told me about it when he handed me the station. Earl heard it from the chief before him. That's 40 years, Roy. At least. People are being... The road is taking people, Roy. It took something from Mike. Something happened to Mike. Roy looked at the table. Mike is fine. Mike clicks his pen 4 times now instead of 3. People's habits change, Corinne. Not like that. Not overnight. Not after they drive into whatever's at the end of that road and come back smiling wrong. Roy was quiet for a long time. The scanner cycled. A state police unit called in a traffic stop on the interstate, and the normalcy of it was obscene. "I'm going to tell you what Earl told me," Roy said finally, "and you're going to understand why we handle it the way we handle it." He told me that Route 9 had been wrong for as long as anyone in county emergency services could remember. Not wrong all the time, only after midnight, and not every night. There was no pattern to which nights. No lunar cycle. No seasonal correlation. No weather dependency. It simply happened sometimes, and when it happened, the road became longer than it was, and it went places that weren't on the map, and it offered things to the people driving on it. Offered things, I repeated. Shortcuts, better facilities, people you miss, things you need. It figures out what you want, and it puts it on the road ahead of you. And what happens if you take what it offers? Roy didn't answer immediately. He reached for the thermos he'd brought from home and poured himself coffee and drank some of it and set the cup down. "Earl lost 2 EMTs in 1989, he said. Drove into what they described on the radio as a fully equipped trauma center at Mile 9. They were transporting a bad cardiac arrest. Patient was dying. The trauma center had a cardiac surgery team standing in the entrance, waving them in. They drove in. The radio went dead. The ambulance was found the next morning at Mile 9, parked on the shoulder, empty. Patient was gone, Both EMTs were gone. Gone as in dead. Gone as in not found. Not ever. Not anywhere. And nobody investigated? Everybody investigated. Sheriff, state police, search and rescue. They found nothing. No building at mile 9, no trauma center, no tire tracks leading off the road. The ambulance was clean. The patient's gurney was still in the back, straps undone. 3 people vanished, and the road was just a road when they looked at it in daylight. I asked Roy what the official explanation was. Abandonment and exposure. 2 EMTs burned out, walked away, patient wandered off, and died in the woods. Case closed, remains never recovered, insurance paid out. And the actual explanation? The road took them, because they went where it pointed. I absorbed that. It was a clear night. Through the station's window I could see the sky over the ridgeline, thick with stars the way it gets in eastern Kentucky when there's no moon. So the protocol, I said. The protocol is to just keep sending crews out there. The protocol is to answer calls. People on Route 9 dial 911, the same as anyone else. We don't get to decide they don't deserve an ambulance because the road between us and them has a problem. We could route around it, take 119 to the Letcher side, and come in from the north. Takes 38 minutes instead of 12 in a cardiac arrest. That's a dead patient. Then reroute after midnight. Night shift only. Some of the worst calls happen after midnight. And the road isn't wrong every night. It's wrong maybe 6, 8 times a month. You want to add a half hour to every overnight call on the chance that tonight's one of the bad nights? He was right. That was the worst part. He was right, and the math was the math. And the math said that more people would die from slow response times than would be affected by whatever the road was doing. The road, in its strange way, mostly let the ambulances through. The calls got answered. The patients got transported. The road rearranged itself and offered its temptations, and sometimes it took someone, but the casualty rate was lower than what the delay from rerouting would produce. The calculus of acceptable loss. I'd encountered it in training materials about mass casualty incidents, about triage, about who you save first when you can't save everyone. I'd never expected to encounter it applied to a road that changed direction after midnight and ate the people who followed its suggestions. What am I supposed to do with this? I asked Roy. What Earl told me to do. Watch the radio. Guide the crews. If they report something wrong, tell them to stay on the road. Don't stop. Don't turn where the road tells them to turn. Don't go into any building that isn't supposed to be there. Don't answer any voice they hear that doesn't come through the radio. You're the anchor, Corinne. You're the voice that keeps them on the real road. And if they don't listen? Roy finished his coffee. He rinsed the cup in the break room sink. He put his thermos back in his bag. Then you log it, he said. And you keep working. He left. I sat at the dispatch desk for the remaining 4 hours of my shift, and I did not read my paperback novel, and I did not sleep. I listened to the radio, and I waited for a call on Route 9, and one didn't come that night. But I began doing the job the way Roy described it, not just dispatching anchoring. When a crew went out on Route 9 after midnight, I stayed on the radio with them continuously. Not just check-ins at mile markers, but constant open-channel communication. I talked to them. I told them what they should be seeing. I said, you should be passing the fire station on your right, and the church should be coming up on the left with the white steeple, and the Combs houses will be on both sides with the blue truck in the third. Driveway. I gave them the real road, landmark by landmark, and I listened for the moment their descriptions stopped matching mine. It worked. For months, it worked. I'd catch the divergence early. A crew would say, "I don't see the church," or "There's no blue truck," and I'd say, "Stay on the road, don't turn, keep your speed at 45, and they'd drive through whatever the road was trying to show them, and they'd come out the other side at the right mile marker, and the call would go normally. I got good at it. I developed a sense for which nights the road was active. There was no reliable pattern, but I started to feel it, a quality in the radio static, a slight delay in transmissions that wasn't accounted for by distance, a heaviness in the air that I could feel through the station's open windows. On those nights, I'd prepare my landmark scripts in advance, have them written out on index cards, ready to feed to whatever crew went out. The crews started to trust me in a way that went beyond normal dispatcher crew dynamics. They'd key the radio and say, "Corinne, is it a Route 9 night?" And I'd say yes or no based on my sense of it, and they'd adjust. On bad nights, they'd drive faster, talk more, keep the radio open. On normal nights, they'd relax. They started calling me the Lighthouse. I didn't love the nickname, but I understood it. For almost a year, nobody was lost. Nobody was taken. The road did its thing and I did mine, and we existed in an equilibrium that I mistook for a solution. I want to be clear about something before I describe what broke the equilibrium. I want to be clear that I am not the hero of this story. I was a woman at a folding table with a radio, and the thing I was doing, guiding crews through a spatial anomaly using verbal landmarks, was not brave. It was a workaround. It was a patch on a system that was fundamentally broken, and I knew it was a patch, and I kept applying it because the alternative was to confront something I had no tools to confront. The thing about patches is that the system underneath keeps deteriorating. In January of 2021, the road started adapting to me. The first sign was the landmarks. I was guiding Unit 1 through a 1:15 a.m. call at mile 12, feeding Janet the landmarks as usual. "You should see the Combs houses coming up, the cluster on both sides, the blue truck in the third driveway," Janet confirmed. "I see them," she said. "Blue truck, third driveway." The call went normally. Patient transported. No anomalies. The next morning I drove Route 9 myself in daylight. I drove it because I drove it every few weeks to refresh my memory of the landmarks, to make sure my index cards were current. I drove slowly, checking each feature against my notes. The blue truck was gone. The third driveway of the Combs cluster had a silver sedan in it, and the woman who came out onto the porch when I slowed down told me the Combs family hadn't owned a blue truck in 2 years. They'd sold it in 2019. I checked my notes. I'd been telling crews to look for the blue truck for over a year, and every crew had confirmed seeing it. On a road that rearranges itself after midnight, every crew had seen a landmark that didn't exist anymore because I'd told them it was there. The road was using my descriptions. It was taking what I said the road should look like, and it was building it. I was telling the crews what to expect, and the road was fulfilling my expectations, and neither the crews nor I could tell the difference between the real road and the road that was being constructed from my words. I drove the full 17 miles. I checked every landmark on my index cards. 7 of them were wrong. Not dramatically wrong. The church was still at mile 7. The fire station was still at mile 4. But the details I'd been feeding to crews, the specific, granular details I'd added to make the descriptions more vivid and trustworthy, were outdated. A fence I described as white had been replaced with a wooden one. A mailbox I cited as being shaped like a barn had been replaced with a standard box. A dead tree I used as a mile 11 reference had been cut down. All 7 of these outdated details had been confirmed by crews driving Route 9 after midnight. Every crew had seen the white fence, the barn mailbox, the dead tree. The road had manifested them on command, using my voice as the blueprint. I was not guiding crews through the real road. I was teaching the road how to build a more convincing copy of itself. My landmark scripts, my careful preparations, my index cards, they were a construction manual. I was telling the road what reality looked like, and it was using that information to make its version more seamless. Which meant the nights I thought were normal, the nights when every landmark matched and the crews arrived without incident, might not have been normal at all. The crews might have been driving through the road's territory the entire time, on a path the road had built to my specifications, and neither they nor I had any way of knowing. I pulled over at mile 15, and I sat in my car, and I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, and I stayed like that for a long time. When I got back to the station, I threw away the index cards. That night, I sat at the dispatch desk with nothing in front of me, no scripts, no landmarks, no anchor. At 1:20 a.m., a call came in for Route 9, Mile 9, difficulty breathing. I dispatched Unit 2. Mike Estes and his new partner, a woman named Dana Shook, headed out. I kept the radio open, but I didn't guide them. I didn't describe landmarks. I just listened. Mike called in at mile 4, mile 7, mile 10. Normal progression. No anomalies. They arrived at the patient's house in the expected time. Treated her. Transported her. Clean run. When they got back, Dana came into the dispatch room and looked at me strangely. "You were quiet tonight," she said. "Yeah, it felt different. Driving without you talking. It felt longer. Did anything seem wrong?" She thought about it. "No, just longer, like the road was waiting for something." I didn't sleep that day. I lay in bed and I stared at the ceiling, and I tried to think through the problem in a way that didn't end with me concluding that the road had co-opted me as a collaborator. I couldn't. Every angle I examined led back to the same point. My intervention had not been neutral. By describing the road to the crews, I had been describing the road to the road. I had given it a template for credibility. I had made it easier for it to pass. And now that I'd stopped, the road knew I'd stopped. Dana said it felt like the road was waiting for me to start talking again, waiting for the next set of instructions. I went to Roy. I told him what I'd found, the outdated landmarks, the road building itself from my descriptions. The entire year of guided runs that might have been travels through a constructed replica rather than the real Route 9. Roy listened the same way he'd listened before. Patient, attentive, unsurprised. Earl tried the same thing, he said. Guiding crews? He called it narrating. He'd get on the radio and tell them everything they should see, tree by tree, mailbox by mailbox. It worked for about 8 months, and then he realized the same thing you did. He told you this? He told me not to try it. He didn't explain why. I think he was hoping I wouldn't think of it on my own. What did he do instead? He stopped narrating, and he went back to standard dispatch. And he lost 2 more people over the next 5 years. And then he retired and gave the station to me and told me the road was my problem now. And what did you do? I lost 3 people over 20 years. You've been here 11 years and you've lost nobody. Whatever you were doing, Corinne, even if the road was using it, the numbers say it was working. The numbers say the road was getting a more convincing skin to wear. That's not the same as working. Roy leaned back in his chair. Maybe not. But the crews came home. Did they? Mike came home, Roy. Are we sure about that? Are we sure about everyone who drove Route 9 while I was feeding the road a script of what reality looks like? He didn't answer that. We sat in the station, and the fluorescent light buzzed, and the scanner cycled, and neither of us had anything else to say. I kept dispatching. I didn't guide anymore, and I didn't narrate, but I kept the radio open and I listened. And I started paying attention to something I'd never tracked before, what the crews said when they came back. Not their run reports, not their medical documentation. I paid attention to the small things, the casual comments, the way they described the drive in the break room afterward when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Road was smooth tonight, Janet said one morning after a 2 a.m. run to mile 13. Real smooth, agreed her partner. Felt like it was freshly paved. Route 9 had not been repaved since 2016. I'd driven it the previous week, and it was as rough and patched as ever, but both of them described it as smooth, and they said it with a pleasure that was subtle but unmistakable, the satisfaction of a nice drive on a good road. A week later, Dana Shook came back from a midnight run and mentioned that the moon had been beautiful over the river. Huge, she said, just sitting right on the ridgeline, like a painting. The moon that night had been a waning crescent, barely visible. I'd looked at it from the station's parking lot during a break. It was not huge. It was not sitting on the ridgeline. Whatever moon Dana had seen, it wasn't the one in the sky over Harlan County. But she'd seen it, and she thought it was beautiful, and there was no distress in her voice at all. I started hearing this more and more. Crews returning from post-midnight. Route 9 runs with descriptions of a road that sounded better than the real one. Better pavement, better visibility. Cleaner shoulders, fuller moon, brighter stars, more pleasant drive. One EMT said the road at 2 a.m. was the best driving I've ever done, and when I checked his vitals on the post-run form, his blood pressure was lower than it had been at the start of the shift. The road was making itself enjoyable. It was rewarding the people who drove on it. It wasn't rearranging the mile markers anymore, or showing them phantom hospitals, or putting loved ones' voices on their phones. It had moved past that. It had learned, maybe from me, maybe from a year of having the real road described to it in detail, that the most effective way to get people to come to it was not to trick them or tempt them, but to make itself the version of the road they wished they were. Driving. And it was working. The crews liked working Route 9 night shifts. They volunteered for them. They'd check the schedule and swap to get the overnight rotation that included Route 9 coverage. Nobody said this explicitly, and if you'd asked them, they probably would have said it was coincidence or preference or just the rhythm of the job. But I watched the schedule requests for 3 months, and the pattern was clear. Something else was happening too, something I noticed because I was the person who talked to all the crews, and I had a long memory for how people sounded. They were getting quieter, not silent, not uncommunicative. But the crews who ran Route 9 after midnight most frequently were gradually becoming less talkative, less inclined to elaborate, less interested in the kind of break-room banter that sustains a small volunteer service. They still did their jobs. They still answered calls and treated patients and wrote reports. But there was a settling in them, a contentment that didn't match the stress of the work. Ambulance crews are not content people. They are tired, dark-humored, occasionally traumatized, often burned out. They complain about pay and equipment and the county commissioners. They argue about protocols. They are human in the specific, abrasive way that emergency workers are human. The Route 9 regulars were smoothing out. The rough edges were wearing down. They were becoming more efficient, more cooperative, less prone to friction. They were becoming, and I struggled to articulate this even to myself, better at their jobs in a way that felt like something had been removed rather than added. In June of 2021, I asked Janet Hobbs to have coffee with me. We went to the diner on Main Street, and I asked her how she was doing. "Good," she said. "Really good, actually. You seem good. You seem calm." "I feel calm. Haven't felt this settled in years." "What changed?" She thought about it, or she appeared to think about it. She went through the motions of consideration, tilting her head, looking at the ceiling, the way Janet always did when she was processing a question. But the answer came out too smoothly. "I think I just found my rhythm," she said. "You know how sometimes you're fighting the job for years, and then one day it just clicks." It clicked. When did it click? I don't know. Sometime last year, maybe. Around the time I stopped guiding you on the radio. Janet looked at me. Her eyes were clear and calm, and there was nothing in them that I could identify as wrong, except for the total absence of the guardedness that Janet Hobbs had carried with her every day I'd known her. Janet was a guarded person. She'd grown up rough, been through a bad marriage, clawed her way into EMS certification as a single mother. She had walls, she had edges. She protected herself by being sharp and watchful and difficult. That woman was not sitting across from me at the diner. The woman sitting across from me was content, settled, smooth. She was Janet in every particular except the one that mattered, which was the damage that had made Janet who she was. "Corinne," she said, "are you okay? You look tired." "I am tired. You should take some nights off. You've been doing overnights too long. It wears on a person." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're sitting here looking at me like I'm a puzzle you're trying to solve, and I'm not a puzzle. I'm just Janet having a good stretch." She reached across the table and put her hand on mine, and her hand was warm, and her touch was genuinely kind, and I felt a wave of something I can only describe as gratitude that was so intense it frightened me, because it came from nowhere, and it meant nothing, and it was exactly the kind of feeling the road would want me to have if it wanted me to stop worrying about Janet. I pulled my hand back. "I have to go," I said. "I have errands." I drove to Route 9, and I parked at the junction at Collie Creek, and I got out of my car, and I stood on the shoulder, and I looked at the road. It was 2 in the afternoon, sunny, warm. The road was just a road. 2 lanes, cracked pavement, wildflowers. A red-tailed hawk was circling over the river. "I know what you're doing," I said out loud, to the road, to the air, to whatever was listening. Nothing happened. A car passed me, an old woman in a Buick who waved. I waved back. "You're not fixing them," I said. "You're replacing what makes them difficult with something that makes them easy. You're taking the parts that resist and smoothing them out, and the people you give back look right, but they're domesticated. They're the version of themselves that would never question you. And you're doing it so gradually that they can't tell, and I can barely tell, and if I say it out loud it sounds like I'm complaining that my coworkers are too happy." The hawk circled. The river moved. The road did nothing. I drove home, and I sat in my apartment, and I opened my notebook, and I wrote, "The road has stopped being dramatic. It has stopped showing impossible things. It is now showing a slightly improved version of reality and letting people acclimate to it, and the acclimation is changing them, and the changes look like wellness." I underlined that last sentence. In August of 2021, I filed a formal report with the Harlan County Emergency Management Agency detailing everything in my notebook. 12 pages, single-spaced, with dates, times, crew names, and specific observations. I cited the 1,989 disappearances, which were a matter of public record. I cited Bree Colson's testimony. I cited the mile marker discrepancies, the phantom structures, the landmark co-optation, the behavioral changes in the crews. I was contacted by a woman named Dr. Patricia Harmon from the Kentucky Division of Emergency Management. She asked me to drive to Frankfurt for a meeting. I drove 3 hours to the state capital, and I sat in a conference room with Dr. Harmon and 2 men who did not identify themselves and who did not speak. Dr. Harmon had my report in a folder. She'd read it. She asked me detailed, specific questions about the timeline, the crews, the pattern of the road's behavior. She was not dismissive. She was not sympathetic. She was clinical in a way that I recognized, from my own dispatch training, the tone of someone who is gathering information without revealing what they already know. When I finished answering her questions, she closed the folder. Miss Elsby, how many roads like Route 9 do you think there are in eastern Kentucky? I hadn't considered the question. I don't know. 1, 14 that we're currently monitoring. I felt the floor tilt. 14? In Kentucky alone. The count for the Appalachian region is higher. I'm not going to give you that number because it won't help you. 14 roads that change after midnight. 14 roads that exhibit spatial and perceptual anomalies during nighttime hours. They don't all behave the same way. Route 9 is one of the more active ones, and based on your report, one of the more sophisticated. The adaptation you've described, the co-optation of your verbal landmarks, the behavioral modification of your crews that's advanced, most of them are still in the lure stage. The lure stage. Phantom structures, loved ones' voices, shortcuts that don't exist, the things you described from your early documentation. Most of the roads we monitor are doing that. Route 9 has moved past it. Past it to what? We don't have a term for it. Integration, maybe. Normalization. The road has stopped trying to get people to turn off the path. It's turned itself into the path. The real road and the other road are converging, and your crews are driving on both of them simultaneously without being able to distinguish one from the other. I asked her what was at the end. Not the end of Route 9, the geographic end, but the end of the process, the end point of integration. Dr. Harmon looked at the two men who had not spoken. One of them looked at the table. The other looked at me. The roads are not separate things, Dr. Harmon said. That's the part we didn't understand for a long time. We treated each one as an isolated anomaly. A haunted road in Harlan County, a bad stretch in Pike County, a weird highway outside of Hazard. We studied them individually for decades. It wasn't until we started comparing behavioral data across all 14 that we saw the pattern. What pattern? They're learning the same things at different rates. They're converging on the same strategy. Route 9 is ahead of the others, but they're all moving in the same direction. Which direction? Toward being indistinguishable from real roads, toward being the roads, not replacing them, becoming them. When the process is complete, there won't be a real Route 9 and a fake Route 9. There will just be Route 9, and it will be both, and the people who drive it will be driving through something that is structurally, perceptually, and experientially identical to a normal road, except that it will be alive, and it will know them, and it will have been shaping them for years. I asked her what that would look like, how you'd know. You wouldn't, she said. That's the point. You wouldn't know. The road would be the road. Your crews would be your crews. The patients would be treated and transported. The run reports would be filed. Everything would function. It would just also be something else at the same time, and the something else would be so perfectly integrated that distinguishing it from reality would require tools we don't have. Then how do you know it's happening at all? Because of the seams. Right now, today, there are still seams. Your pen-click observation about Mike Estes, that's a seam. The fact that Janet's guardedness disappeared, that's a seam. The outdated landmarks your crews confirmed seeing, those are seams. They're errors in the integration. They're moments where the new version doesn't quite match the original, and someone attentive enough notices. And when the seams are gone, then it's done. I sat with that. The two men continued not speaking. Dr. Harmon watched me with a gaze that was compassionate and professional and completely helpless. What do you want me to do? I asked. Keep doing your job. Don't guide them anymore. You were right to stop that. You were providing raw material. But stay on the radio. Stay connected to your crews. Be the person who notices the seams. And when I notice them, report them. Same way you reported to us. We have a documentation system. We're tracking the integration across all 14 roads. Your data helps us understand the progression. But you're not stopping it. We don't know how to stop it. We don't know what it is. We don't know if stopping it is possible, or if attempting to stop it would accelerate it. We are in the documentation phase. The documentation phase. Yes. While people are being changed. Dr. Harmon closed the folder and folded her hands on top of it. Miss Elsby, I understand your frustration. I want you to understand the scale of what we're dealing with. 14 roads in Kentucky, more in Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina. We have colleagues in other states, other countries, tracking similar phenomena on roads that bear no physical or historical connection to each other. This is not a local problem with a local solution. This is a process that is happening to transportation infrastructure across a geographic range we haven't fully mapped, and the best tool we have against it is people like you who sit at the edge and watch. People like me, dispatchers, station chiefs, toll collectors, highway maintenance workers, people whose jobs keep them adjacent to the roads without requiring them to drive the roads at the critical hours. You are the observation layer. You see what the drivers can't. I asked her how many people in the observation layer knew what they were observing. She said the number was smaller than she wanted it to be. I drove home to Harlan County. 3 hours on the interstate, which was just an interstate, which was asphalt and guardrails and rest stops and nothing that watched me or knew my name. I got home. I fed my cat. I sat on my couch, and I did not open my notebook because there was nothing to write that would change anything. I went back to work that night. I dispatched calls. Route 9 was quiet. The next night, it was quiet too. The night after that, a call came in at 1 a.m., chest pains at mile 6, and I dispatched Unit 1, and Janet drove, and she called in her mile markers in order, and she arrived in the expected time, and she treated the patient and transported him and came back and said the road was smooth. I listened to her say the road was smooth, and I heard it the way I now heard everything with a split attention, one ear on the words and one ear on the silence underneath them, listening for seams. I found one 2 weeks later, not on Route 9. A call came in at 11:50 p.m. Car accident on Route 38, which was a different road entirely, 14 miles west of Route 9, connecting 2 small communities in the western part of the county. Route 38 was not on my list. Route 38 was not on Dr. Harmon's list of 14. Route 38 was a short, unremarkable county road with no history of anomalies. I dispatched Unit 3. They responded, treated the patient, transported. Normal run. The crew came back at 12:40 a.m. and filed their paperwork and went home. In the morning, I read the run report. Everything was standard, but in the comments field, the driver had written, "Road was smooth tonight." I'd never heard anyone describe Route 38 as smooth. It was one of the worst maintained roads in the county, a minefield of potholes and frost heaves that the highway department patched every spring and the winter destroyed again every fall. I drove Route 38 that afternoon. It was terrible. Potholes, frost heaves, exactly as I remembered. But somebody had driven it at midnight and called it smooth. I called Dr. Harmon. I told her. She was quiet for a long time. "Which road?" she asked. "Route 38, Harlan County." "That's not on our list." "I know. You're saying it's spreading. I'm saying one of my crews drove a different road after midnight and described it the same way they describe Route 9. I don't know if it's spreading or if Route 38 has its own problem or if my crew brought something with them. That last possibility hadn't occurred to me until I said it, and once I said it, it sat in the air between us like something heavy and alive. "Your crew brought something with them," Dr. Harmon repeated. They've been driving Route 9 at night for 2 years. They've been shaped by it, smoothed by it. What if the integration isn't just the road changing? What if the people who've been changed carry the change with them, and when they drive other roads, the change follows? Dr. Harmon was quiet again. I heard her write something. "I need you to track this," she said. "Every crew, every road, every post-midnight run. I need to know if the smoothness follows specific drivers, or if Route 38 develops its own independent pattern." I tracked it. I tracked it for the rest of the year and into the next, and the answer was both. Route 38 began exhibiting its own anomalies, minor ones, early stage, the kind Route 9 had shown 5 years prior, slight discrepancies in distance. A driver reporting a house that wasn't there, a feeling that the road was longer than it should be. But the smoothness followed specific drivers too. Janet, Mike, Dana, and the other Route 9 regulars when they drove any road after midnight. The road behaved. It was smooth. It was pleasant. It was the best driving they'd ever done. And the roads they drove began, incrementally, to develop their own anomalies in the weeks that followed. The crews were carriers. The road had gotten into them not like a disease, not like a possession, but like a preference. They had internalized the road's improved version of reality, and they were radiating it outward. And every road they drove at night absorbed a little of it and began its own slow process of becoming something that watched and knew and shaped. I reported all of this to Dr. Harmon. She confirmed that similar patterns were emerging at other monitoring sites. Roads that had been clean were developing anomalies in areas where affected personnel had been redeployed. A highway department crew in Virginia that had been servicing one of the anomalous roads was transferred to a different district, and within 3 months, 3 roads in the new district began showing early-stage irregularities. The network was growing, not through the roads, through the people. I asked Dr. Harmon if there was a plan. "The plan is documentation," she said, and I heard in her voice the same exhaustion that Danny Pruitt had carried in his last weeks as dispatcher. The tiredness that comes not from work, but from carrying knowledge that is too heavy and too useless. I kept working. I don't know what else to tell you. I kept dispatching calls and listening to the radio and tracking the seams in my notebook. The seams got fewer, the crews got smoother. The roads got smoother. Everything was functioning, and the functioning was the horror, because functioning is the last thing the process needs to eat before it's finished. Here is what I have to say, and I'm saying it now because I think the window for saying it is closing. I've been doing this job for 11 years. For the first 6, I didn't know what was happening. For the next 3, I tried to fight it and may have made it worse. For the last 2, I've been documenting it while it happens around me, through me, because of me. I am part of the observation layer. I am one of the people who sits at the edge and watches. And I have watched long enough to understand that watching is not a neutral act. The road learned from my narration. The crews learned from the road. The other roads learned from the crews. And I learned from all of it, and what I learned is shaping how I describe it to you right now, and I cannot guarantee that the thing I'm describing has not influenced how I describe it. That's the seam I can't close, the last one I can see. I'm telling you about a road that changes, and I'm telling you it's dangerous, and I'm telling you the people who drive it are being altered. And every word I use to tell you this has been shaped by 11 years of proximity to the thing I'm warning you about. My vocabulary has been smoothed. My observations have been guided. The very clarity with which I can articulate the threat may be the threat's most sophisticated product. I notice this. I notice it the way I notice the pen clicks and the missing guardedness and the updated roads from a slight distance, with a detachment that might be professional composure or might be the early stages of the same settling that took Janet and Mike and Dana and every other person who spent too long in the system. I still work at the station. I still answer the radio. I still dispatch calls on Route 9 after midnight. The road is smooth every night now. No discrepancies, no phantom hospitals, no phone calls from the dead. Just a clean, pleasant, well-maintained road that takes the ambulances where they need to go and brings the crews home calm and content and ready for the next shift. Roy retired last year. He handed me the station the way Earl handed it to him. He told me the road was my problem now. He looked calm when he said it. Settled. Smooth. I drove him home that night. It was after midnight. The road was beautiful. The moon was full and heavy on the ridgeline, and the pavement was perfect, and the mile markers counted up in order, 1 through 17, and every landmark was exactly where it was supposed to be. And I can't tell you whether any of it was real. What I can tell you is that this morning I checked the Department of Transportation's road inventory for Harlan County. When I started this job, the county maintained 147 miles of roadway across 31 numbered routes. As of this morning's filing, the inventory lists 147 miles across 31 routes, same numbers, same roads. But when I pulled the individual route surveys, 18 of the 31 had been resurfaced in the last 2 years. 18 roads in a county that can barely afford to patch 3 per season. The surveys were signed off by Highway Department personnel I've dispatched ambulances for. They're real people. I've met them. They seem fine. They describe the roads they've been maintaining as smooth. I tried to call Dr. Harmon last week. The number she gave me connects to a general line at the Division of Emergency Management. The woman who answered said there was no one named Patricia Harmon on staff, and there never had been. I described the meeting, the conference room in Frankfurt, the 2 silent men, the folder with my report in it. The woman listened politely and said she had no record of such a meeting taking place. I hung up, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of the gas station that is my ambulance service, and I looked at Route 9, which was right there, 50 feet from where I was parked, visible through the chain-link fence, at the edge of our lot, 2 lanes, cracked pavement, wildflowers on the shoulders, or smooth pavement and clean shoulders and mile markers that glow faintly in the afternoon sun in a way that mile markers don't. I can't tell anymore. That's what I need you to understand. I have been the observation layer for too long, and the layer has been observed in return, and I can no longer certify that my observations are my own. The notebook is full. 12 composition books, front to back, 5 years of documentation. I mailed copies to 4 different addresses last week: a journalist in Lexington, a professor at the University of Kentucky, a cousin in Ohio, and a post office box I rented in West Virginia under a name that isn't mine. I don't know if the notebooks will read as credible evidence or as the detailed ravings of a sleep-deprived dispatcher having a prolonged break with reality. I don't know which of those things they are. I know that tonight I will sit at the folding table, and I will answer the radio, and a call will come in on Route 9, and I will dispatch a crew, and they will drive into something that may or may not be a road, and they will come back, and they will be fine. They will be smooth and calm and content, and their vitals will be good and their paperwork will be clean, and they will describe the drive as pleasant. And I will listen to them describe it, and some part of me will think, that does sound pleasant. That sounds like the best driving anyone has ever done. What would it be like to stop sitting at the desk and get in the ambulance and drive it myself? What would it be like to feel the road under me, smooth and warm and knowing, a road that has learned what I want and built itself to give it to me? I have that thought every night now. It arrives at about 2 in the morning when the station is quiet and the radio is idle and the road is right there, 50 feet away, through the fence. I haven't driven Route 9 after midnight. Not once. In 11 years. That's the one line I haven't crossed. I've stood at the edge and watched, but I haven't driven it, and as long as I haven't driven it, I can tell myself that I'm still the observer, still separate, still able to see the seams. But the seams are gone. I've told you that. The seams are gone, and the road is smooth, and my crews are calm, and the county's roads are being resurfaced by pleasant people who do good work, and the only thing left that's rough, the only edge remaining in the entire system, is me. And I'm so tired of being the rough thing. I'm tired of being the one who doesn't sleep and doesn't rest and doesn't trust the calm that everyone else has found. I'm tired of being the lighthouse when the water is still and the ships are all safe, and the only thing the light is illuminating is the keeper, standing alone in the tower, watching a sea that doesn't need watching. I'm going to drive Route 9 tonight. I've already decided. I decided this morning, when I checked the road inventory and called Doctor Harmon's dead number and sat in the parking lot and felt the road waiting for me, patient and warm, the way it has been waiting for 11 years. I'm going to get in my car at 2 in the morning, when the thought arrives, and instead of sitting with it, I'm going to follow it. I'm going to drive through the junction at Collie Creek and onto Route 9, and I'm going to watch the mile markers count up, 1 through 17, and I'm going to see every landmark I described for 5 years. The church and the fire station and the Combs houses and the blue truck that hasn't existed since 2019. And the road will be smooth, and it will be mine, and I will finally understand what my crews understand, what Janet and Mike and Dana understand, what the road has been trying to show me since the first night I sat at the dispatch desk and picked up the radio. I wanted to tell someone first. That's all this is, not a warning. I'm past warnings. The road is in the county's infrastructure, and in the state's documentation, and in the people I work with, and probably in me already, and there is nothing I can tell you that will change any of that. This is just a woman at a folding table, about to leave the table for the first time, telling you that she sat here as long as she could. The road is smooth tonight. I can feel it from here. I'll let you know how the drive is.